But in the budget, we did have some improvements to make.
Pretty sneaky way to get them approved.
Well, you gotta do what you can, you know. 25 years of government, you learn a few tricks. When we have sound, we'll probably start with sound. Or are you gonna be interrupted?
Okay.
Don't get it up in a minute. You know, I'll sit here and sign it.
Okay, I'd like to call to order the Financial Advisory Board meeting. It's 2:16. Welcome to the special meeting Thursday, August 19th, 2021. Kindly silence your cell phones if you've not already. Thank you. Ms. Thompson, may I have a roll call, please?
Member Goldberg, Member Weiner,
Present.
Member Packler,
Present.
Member Greenwald,
Present.
Member Stump, Member Riami, and Chairperson Stern.
Present. Thank you. Oh, can we all rise, please, for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. An approval of the agenda. I have one item that I'd like to add to the agenda, and that's the analysis of the general fund balance. Vice Mayor Natasha Moore will make that presentation, and that'll be 8D. Are there any other additions to the agenda?
Yes. If we could, I think it'll be brief, but I would like to discuss future meeting schedules and deliverables for this group.
Member Greenwald, I am coming up with the next schedule at your next meeting. You have a scheduled meeting. Do you want to do that then, or you want to just go ahead and do that now, the full meeting schedule for next year?
Again, I thought that it would be brief. We could do it today, but if I don't know when our next scheduled special meeting in quotes is. The last one I looked on the schedule is as posted for future meetings on the town website. It's not posted as yet. That just goes through
Okay, I
near
can
the end
double
of
check that.
September sometimes. So I don't know when our next meeting is actually scheduled for, but I don't think it'll be a long discussion, and some of it may be taken care of by the additional items, or I can just drone on for a minute or two here and be done. Either way, whatever you'd like, Mr. Chairman.
Why don't we put that under the board member comments, which is right after that? You could, if
That's
that's
fine.
okay, then we can cover it at that point. That's
That's
okay with
fine.
you? Okay. Any other additions? Okay, all in favor of the agenda, say yes, please.
Can I have a motion, please? To
Move
approve the
we approve
agenda?
the agenda.
Public comments are now open. They'll allow 3 minutes to speak. Ms. Thompson, are there any public comments?
There were no pre-registered public comments.
Thank you very much. Approval of the minutes. First, in the packet, the March 29th Advisory Board special meeting minutes. Are there any additions, corrections? Not, may I have a motion to accept, please?
Move we approve the minutes of both March 29th and also of July 8th.
Okay, we can do July 8th separately, but let's do first the 29th. Everybody in favor of accepting it? Anybody opposed?
I'm sorry, was there a second?
Yes.
Second.
And now, secondly, is the July 8th. Are there any corrections to the July 8th minutes? Hearing none, I have a motion to accept, please. Second, please. All in favor, say aye. Thank you. Motion passed. Unfinished business, there is none. New business, the first thing I'd like to do in the new business on the nomination of the chairperson and vice chair, I'd like to read into record a email from Ron Riami to myself on this topic. He said, David, I hope all is well with you. I'm not going to be able to make the next meeting, which is this meeting. I'll be traveling that day. I'm willing, if anybody would like to nominate me for vice chair, and I am voting for you as chair again if you're available. And he just comments, and the medical looks like a no-brainer. Thank you, Ron. Okay. That being said, the first business is the nomination of chairperson. Are there any nominations?
Nominate Mr. Stern.
Okay, any other nominations? Okay, then I'll accept. Second is the nomination
I'm
for.
sorry.
Whoa.
Do we have a
vote
motion?
on that. All in favor, say aye.
We
Anybody
need a
opposed?
motion for that, please.
I
Yeah,
move that we appoint David Stern as chairperson.
We have a second. Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Thank you. Next is nomination for vice chair, and
I nominate Ron Riami for vice chair.
I'll second that motion. Are there any other nominations? Hearing none, may I have a motion to close nominations, please? So we'd like to move to close, please?
You made the motion already.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Okay, thank you. Next item on the agenda, 8C, is the 2022 health insurance renewal. Finance Director, Matt Lalo, please approach. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and board members. This would be, I guess we don't have a display of this, but I know that at least one of the two slides that we intended to show are were sent to you electronically, I believe.
Yeah, Matt, there's a copy on each of the
Okay.
the folks here.
Good. You can see we had our insurance broker look at a couple different firms. None were as competitive as the renewal being offered with Humana in terms of premium paid and benefits provided. You can see there that our current, down towards the bottom of that summary spreadsheet, down towards the bottom, you see the current rates that the town pays what was initially offered as renewal rates by Humana, and then the negotiated rates, which we would have going forward that were negotiated down with our insurance broker. And you can see for the Humana POS point of service plan that provides coverage for about 30 of the 42 employees within the town who get coverage. There was a net reduction of about 2.57% in our premiums for that plan. The other plan is a buy-up plan where employees can sort of contribute a little bit of their own money in addition to what the town pays. And there was a bit of an increase there, but in terms of healthcare increases, it's pretty modest at 5%. But as you can see, the bulk of the town employees participate in the plan that actually has a reduced premium for next year in terms of what the town pays. We are also, did they get the second sheet? Okay, so given that we were looking at such favorable rates, we asked our insurance broker to talk with Humana about offering another alternative for our employees if they choose to do the buy-up and pay a little extra for some additional benefits. It's very insignificant difference in terms of what the town would pay if anybody happens to choose that particular plan. I guess I can try and answer any questions that you may have. It's staff's recommendation that we move forward with a renewal with Humana at the rates indicated.
Anybody have any questions on the panel?
Yes.
I think it's, good, please.
What percentage of the employees are on both plans?
If you look on the first sheet that you were provided that summarizes the two healthcare plans, you can see the numbers there, and the column indicates that 30 employees are in the Humana point of service plan, which is identified as POS 16 option 25 at the top of the column. And then, oh, there we go. And the right half of that spreadsheet, you'll see that there are 12 employees who participate in the buy-up plan, where they contribute a little more.
Okay, and just
just-
for modification, is that
Sure.
customary? Has this been long-term that it's been like this?
Yeah, I'd say it's roughly around this kind of thing. I mean, there's a few employees who choose to do the buy-up every year. It's usually not a significant percentage.
Okay, thank you.
Just a comment, in being involved a year ago in the workup of these, all the different plans and so forth, I think it's pretty admirable that you were able to get an actual decrease in this atmosphere
Yes.
on that thing. So I think that's very, very well done from.
Our insurance broker has done some good work.
Okay. If there are no other comments, while I have you up here.
Sure.
I know it's a little out of order, but I'm just going to pursue it. I want to know if anybody on the panel has, the board has any questions on the budget. I know that it was on the meeting, it was revised, it's still in works, but if there are any questions, he's the man to ask the question. So anybody have any questions on that? I have one.
If you can hold on just a minute, we can probably get
Oh, look at that. Okay.
the budget brought up as well. You want to speak that much? You want to go? Or? Oh, it's probably not turned on.
Yeah, it's
Oh, there you
working.
go. Okay,
I'll let you go. I'll jump in.
okay. Sure, you will. Sure you will. Go ahead, Chair Stern. You said you had a question.
The only question I have, and I mean, you just may want to bring to everybody's attention in watching the video of the commission meeting, the contribution that we got because of COVID from the government and the effect on the budget. Anticipated.
I'm gonna defer to our town manager.
Yeah, so basically what we initially anticipated about $1.6 million were going to come out of the American Rescue Plan Act for the town. Last week, while we were in Orlando for the League of Cities Conference, we had an opportunity to meet with the Department of Emergency Management. The final allotment for us is 1.961 million for us to utilize. Just about all of it, as the commission will direct, but is water and sewer. So we're able to fund capital projects to the tune of $2 million in water and sewer. The other categories of eligibility really don't fit into a small town. So really, we're going to be focusing on the water and sewer side. And with that, when we spoke about it on Tuesday, we're going to take those dollars, work with our rate consultant, and they're going to look at putting that number back into the calculations to see what it does in the latter years of that 5-year window on our rates, the water and sewer rates, which have gone up, as everyone is aware. So we're going to look at when we add that $2 million of additional capital back into the system and the rate structure to see how that would help in the latter years. But it's really good news. We got $2 million. That number could change if communities can't utilize all of their funds and or don't take those monies. That gets recalculated and pushed back out to the other communities. So we're looking at about 1.961 million. Here again in our budget, you see 800,000. This information is so new that we haven't figured out how to reprogram it back into the budget, but it comes in 2 tranches. We'll get $1 million in the first, and then 12 months from now, we'll get another $1 million. And we have until December of 24 to spend those dollars, which could be tricky with some of our cap that, if we got to figure that out. If we can't spend more than 350,000, we could find ourselves in a little bit of a pinch, but we're going to work through that. But again, it's going to have a positive impact on the water and sewer budgets and the overall general fund. So it's good news.
Are there any other questions on the board here? Okay, thank you for that update.
Sure.
Now I'd like to introduce Natasha, who's going to give a presentation. As most of you know, Natasha was vice chair of this board, and she's brought her expertise all the way to the commission.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. I have a presentation as well, so hopefully it will get up on the screen. But as I introduce the topic, this is a project that is on our strategic plan. Awesome. So this was, identified as something that the town should be looking at. And it has to do with the remaining amount in our general fund. So you're going to hear me call it general fund balance, surplus, reserves. It's basically the extra money that the town has set aside. And so I've been working on this. It's been on my mind, and I put some information together. I kind of sprung it on the commission on Tuesday, and I'm springing it on you guys. It's the purpose of presenting this to you is to get your feedback, to get any ideas for what else to consider as we explore this topic. And I think it's timely because we have a major capital project coming up, and that is to build out our fire rescue. So some of the key questions that I thought of as I was going through this project, and I would encourage you to speak up and interrupt me if you have other thoughts. But the key considerations were, okay, what are our current levels in Highland Beach? And I'll explain what our current policy is and how much in reserves we currently have. I thought it was important to compare it to our neighbors. Our neighbors, perhaps that have their own fire rescue system, our neighbors that are also have the type of catastrophe exposure that we have, things like, and see what they are carrying and what their policies are. The accounting boards, they do put out what they consider as best practices for a town. So there is a standard out there. And so the accounting board has put out what they feel is a best practice for minimum levels of reserves that a municipality should carry. And so, I think it has impact on what we do with our fire rescue. So this next slide shows the comparison to our neighbors. So I ranked it from lowest to highest. We are HB, Highland Beach, the third column from the right. And each column represents, for each of the municipalities, which are labeled across the bottom axis, what the percentage of expenditures each municipality is carrying. And as I looked through the financial reports and budgets, I also tried to look for, okay, not only, there's a certain amount that each municipality carries, and then there's also a policy that they have. So what is their minimum policy? And this is all relative to annual expenditures. So that's what the percentage is based on. So I'm going to go from.
When you say annual expenditures, are you talking about the operating budget? Are you including all the special funds budgets?
It's just the general fund expenditures, which is similar as. Which
So
is,
it's the general operating budget. It wouldn't include, for example, the water and sewer budgets.
correct.
Is that correct?
Correct.
Even though most of our reserves, as we know historically, actually came from sale of property that was really under the underwater management. I mean, that's probably irrelevant because it's in the general fund, but I'm just trying to figure out what these numbers represent. So this is as a percentage of our operating budget.
Yes.
Okay,
And
thank you.
it's the surplus in our general fund. So if we have surplus in other funds, that is not accounted for in here. This is only the surplus in our general fund. So if we have surplus in water, surplus in some of our other funds, that is its own surplus. And that's what I'll tackle after this.
Right, but for example, all our debt now is tied up with water and sewer. That may change when it comes to fire, but for now, we don't have, I mean, our debt is all tied up with water and sewer, as I understand it. And our reserves are pretty much all in the general fund and not in the water and sewer and other special funds. Isn't that correct? That's not correct?
We can sort of,
I
don't want to
I'm
interrupt.
probably
in the
getting
middle of
into
the
too much
vice mayor.
detail, but okay.
But it is something we can bring up. It is included in the budget presentation that we only, went one or two slides into, but we can go back to that and bring it up and show you what the reserve levels are in those other funds. But I don't want to interrupt what the vice mayor's.
No, I don't either. And I didn't realize that the budget presentation was going to be on this agenda because it didn't appear on the agenda.
So going from left to right, the leftmost column is what the Accounting Standards Board minimum recommendation is. So if you were to look at that policy, that paper, they are recommending that municipalities have at a minimum, basically 2 months worth of reserves in their fund balance. Most of the times when they refer to it months of expenditures out of the year. They're recommending you have at least 2 months in surplus. And I guess another point of clarification is in your general fund, there is certain portions that is like restricted and committed. That is, you can't touch. And I am only talking about those amounts that are not restricted and not committed. So Tequesta, they are carrying what the minimum policy is. Along the bottom, you can see it. I'm labeling annual expenditures. So I wanted to give everyone a feel for the size of the budgets that we're talking about for each of these municipalities. So for Tequesta, their budget is actually pretty similar to ours. Their budget is $13 million per year. Tequesta has their own fire rescue. They have their own police, and I believe they have their own water treatment plant. So they're pretty similar to us, except for that they do have some inland, whereas we are all barrier island. Delray Beach, they are holding 27% of their expenditures, and they have a much bigger budget than we do, the 140 million. The next one is North Palm Beach. They also have their own fire rescue. Their budget is basically double ours, 25 million. So Boca Raton, their minimum policy is they want to hold at least 20% in their fund. And then, you know, you may have more just as years go by, things accumulate. So they're actually holding 34% of their annual expenditures. And their budget is the largest on the page at 188 million. Lighthouse Point, they also establish a minimum policy, and their minimum policy specifically states there's a specific portion for their bridges. There's a specific portion for disaster recovery. And then they also have what we would call budget stabilization, like an amount because of the timing of the revenues versus when the timing of the expenditures are paid. So their specific policy says they need to hold at least 31% of their annual expenditures. And as of their last annual report, they're actually holding 40%. And their budget is a little bit more than ours. Their annual budget of expenditures is 17 million.
Excuse me, our disaster relief fund, which I guess is around $1 million or close to it, is that in that number, or is that separate? Is that considered restricted?
It is in there. It is not considered restricted. So there's committed and restricted. That's totally off limits. You can't touch that. And then after that, you have assigned and unassigned. So that's what I have here are any in the municipalities, whatever they're calling assigned and unassigned. Assigned just means you have a specific purpose for that money that you're setting aside. And then unassigned is you don't have a specific purpose. And the reason why I combined it is because some municipalities, they're just putting money in their surplus and they're not really identifying anything as assigned or unassigned. It's just kind of all in there. So I'm combining those two in these figures that I have on this chart. So Ocean Ridge is a good example of that, where everything is unassigned. And they're holding 55% of their annual expenditures. Boynton Beach provides their fire rescue. And their budget is a little bit less than ours, 8 million. Highland Beach, we have a stated policy where we have 1 month's worth of our expenditures goes to disaster recovery. So that works out to be about $1 million, because so the numbers kind of work out nice, right? So our annual expenditures are 12 million. So each month is $1 million. So we've got about $1 million to disaster recovery. And then we have 2 months worth, which is to what we're calling budget stabilization. And And basically the purpose of that is when, I guess we get our tax revenue in December, but, so it's for the October, November, 2 months worth, to make sure that we have enough money to cover the expenditures before we actually get the property tax revenue in December. And then we have a little bit because we, from our last true up, I guess, from the fire, we had like a little, like 100,000 or so. That's so small. I'm not even really talking about that here. So that 25%, which is our Highland Beach's minimum policy right now, is about 3 million. And so we have 6 million, which is called unassigned. Moving on, Indian River Shores. That is another barrier island community north of Hutchinson Island. They established a fire rescue system. They actually do a public safety system where the police and the fire are combined, and they are holding 83% of their annual expenditures. Their budget is about half of ours. Their annual budget is about 6 million. Juno Beach, they have a minimum policy, and their minimum policy is 50%. Fire is provided by Palm Beach County. They do have their own police department. They get their water from other utilities. They are currently holding 107% of their annual expenditures, and their annual expenditures are 7 million a year. So this kind of gives you a feel for what some of the other municipalities are doing. I don't know if you have any other questions about that. I think it's good information to have.
At what level, if that dropped, would you affect your bond rating? So if that's 6 million, because the disasters can be well over $1 million if you get hit with a big hurricane.
The town presently does not have an outstanding bond rating. But, if we were to have some type of storm event hit the town directly, we'd probably spend a bit more than $1 million.
Right, that's my point. Yeah.
The bulk of our expenses would be related to debris removal, which eventually we would get a significant portion of that probably reimbursed by the federal government and the state government. But there's a pretty good time lag between the time that you incur those expenses and have the cash outlays related to the storm event and when you get reimbursement from the other government.
And the town does carry insurance. So
Yeah.
we do have property insurance. I don't know how much of it covers debris removal, but we do have a 5% deductible. So the insured value on the property is about 26 million. So the 5% deductible is about 1.3 million. And I guess one question I have about the fund balance, do we need in the, I guess I'm not quite clear on, I know we need to get authority to spend above 350. If we were to have a disaster, does that, it's covered, there's no authorization required.
No, for emergencies,
We can use that money without voter approval. Okay. So there's, the accounting board in their paper that discusses the minimum fund balance, it's called the GASB number 54. They list out some considerations that municipalities may want to consider as they establish their policy. So as I mentioned, they're recommending at least 2 months as a minimum for a fund balance. We currently are holding the 25%. of expenditures. Something that they're recommending that a town considers is the predictability of their revenues, or if their expenditures are volatile from year to year. So for example, if you have 9 million one year, 12 million the next year, you may want to increase your balance if you have that type of situation. Our revenues are fairly predictable because 80% of it comes from the property tax. Also, another consideration is the volatility of your revenue source. Like for example, if you have a lot of revenue coming from commercial payers. So for example, like Boca Raton, I think their biggest payer is like Town Center. So like if something happened with that commercial enterprise, perhaps you would lose out on a good chunk of revenue. I kind of consider us to have low risk from that perspective because our revenues is coming from residential property as opposed to we're not too dependent on commercial businesses. Some municipalities are dependent on state aid or federal grants. We don't really have that. And then, of course, the big one is the exposure to one-time outlays, natural disasters. Obviously, we have the hurricane exposure, but we do have insurance policies in place. So this chart shows the actual balance in the general fund for the reserve. So, and I'm going back to 2003. So the blue line represents the level of fund balance. So in 2003, it was just over 2 million. And now all the way to the right in 2020, it's 9 million. So this is the total, the disaster piece, the budget stabilization plus the unassigned. And then I also thought it would be interesting to know what were some of the largest additions to the fund. And that was in 2007, we had about a $2 million increase to the fund. In 2016, the second highest was 1.1 million addition. Our biggest decrease over this time period was in 2011. We took 275,000 from the fund. And in 2012, we took 211,000 from the fund. But in this overall, the 17-year history, 12 of those years were additions to the fund, and 5 of those years were reductions to the fund. And then I thought it was also interesting to know around the recession, what happened. So the recession happened, I think it officially started December of 2007 and it went through middle of 2009. So I think we felt maybe more of the impacts, it's like delayed. Maybe we felt those impacts in 2011, 2012. So as I was looking at the fund balance, I thought it was also relevant to consider how, these different options for paying for the fire rescue. And Matt had presented the commission with a table of, just to give us a feel for if we were to do loans or if we were to do a bond, what were the going interest rates? What were the cost of financing? So the 10-year, the interest rate underlying the 10-year was 1.5, which obviously is at a historic low. The 15-year 1.75 and the 20-year, that actually is a bond. And that bond is 2.3. So the 10 and the 15-year were loans. And then the 20-year, that was a bond. Those were bond examples. So, and then the next column represents the amount that if we were to take out a loan for those loans or for the bond. And then the next column is the total expense plus the loan amount. So I just calculated what's the total cost of financing and what's the cost of the financing per year, just to kind of give people a feel for, the difference of, using cash on hand versus if we were to take.
Why would you use cash on hand when money's so cheap?
Yep, that's what a lot of people, yeah, exactly. So that is what a lot of people say. As long as what you feel is in the red box is so cheap. So, if we were to take, so for example, the 15-year loan, it's at a 1.75 interest rate. That's a low amount, but it costs us over $1 million to do that. And it's at, $70,000 a year. If that's what everybody, I just think it's something that we all need to really be aware of. The borrowing cost, it's not free to borrow this money. It is $1 million. What do we do here to save $1 million in our budget? We would bend over backwards to save $1 million in other
Yeah, we could
areas.
reinvest in a 10-year treasury and arbitrage it a little bit as well. Huh? Well, you could reinvest. It's called defeasance.
I don't want to get too far into that, but we are not allowed to sort of borrow money to invest it for that purpose. It runs afoul of federal tax law for us, for tax exempt purposes.
Yeah, so the surplus currently is earning 0.1%.
Is that assuming a AAA bond rating? Even though you don't have a bond rating?
The town, as I said, does not have a bond rating. If we were to seek a bond rating, we'd probably be in the very strong AA to AAA category, given the economic and demographics and just the, the overall financial strength of the town.
So the cost actually could be cheaper.
Yes, we get the most favorable rates.
Yeah.
But yeah, that is a common response, but I just want to make sure everybody's aware of the expense that's associated with that and the fact that we really can't earn interest on the money that we have. So some of the key takeaways, the level of reserves, we've got some neighbors that are higher and we're higher than some of the other neighbors. Our current policy is to maintain 25%. So another key point of this project is to revisit that. Like, I don't know if maybe we want to come up with a minimum policy for the unassigned. That's kind of like what Juneau does. They say 50% and they call it all unassigned. I think we should take a look at that. Another consideration with the fire rescue is the fire rescue will be used for many years in the future. I guess one point I would make is, we've had taxpayers pay into this since the balance has been increasing since 2006. So we've had, I don't know what you consider a generation, but almost a generation of taxpayers paying into the surplus. How should we use any of that $6 million in order to build the fire rescue? That's something I think that we should discuss. And should we set some guidelines where, should this fund balance, if it should get to a certain maximum amount, perhaps there should be a policy on what we should do with it. So I'm interested in your thoughts and your feedback. What else should we look into?
Well, just to comment, I appreciate the presentation, and clearly it's one of the options. I think if this board is willing, the town is going to need to spend a lot of time this year. There's a lot going on, as obviously the commission knows, at the same time. in terms of fire rescue and how to best fund it, and obviously using some reserves as a possibility, loans, bonds, et cetera, other possibilities. And a lot of that ties in with some of the work that the Charter Review Board has recently been doing regarding spending caps, whether that be the $350,000 cap that we currently have for single expenditures. But it's even much broader than that in terms of what kind of limit should be removed versus possibly added in terms of what can be done by the commission with the reserve fund at their choosing without a referendum, or what can be done with tax rates without referendums. So there's a lot of issues, I think, that we obviously we're an advisory group and not a decision-making legislative or an executive group, but there's a lot to be discussed. That's all really needs to be integrated, I think, rather than taken piecemeal. A lot of it's going to end up tying into what goes on I know for the referendum in the fall, it's been decided to just have an up or a down on the fire department, basically. But later on, there's going to be much more broad-reaching things in terms of both governance and spending limits that are going to come up at some point. I think the commission will have come up for a possible referendum and changes in the charter in the spring. So I think that this is worthwhile to look at as one of the alternatives, certainly. I mean, I think we're all gratified that we have money in reserve. I mean, that's all a good thing. And all we keep hearing is what good shape that the town is in financially, which is all good news, obviously. But what the best combination of potential funding sources, how that's going to work out, I think is going to require a significant discussion among people who know a hell of a lot more about the options than I do, since it's not really certainly my subject matter excellence area. I think it's a worthwhile presentation and worthwhile look at one of the possibilities. So thank you.
Just a question, as it relates to flooding in South Florida. I know Palm Beach County has certain areas that are subject to, say, from an insurance perspective, a flood every 100 years, right? What is, out of curiosity, related to risk, what is Highland Beach? Is it once every 100 years? And has there been a flood in 100 years?
I'm not sure, but we do have flood insurance.
Okay.
We do have good, we
Okay.
do, we actually have pretty good flood insurance, like the 5% deductible that we have for hurricane.
Sure.
That does not apply in a flood. Our deductible is actually really low.
Okay.
And not, that might be something you guys might be interested in, and this has been informative for me as I was working on this project. I'm taking a close look at what insurance policies the town has to get a better understanding in a disaster. What is our retention for the disaster?
Okay.
And the wind, as I mentioned, is 5% of the insured value, which I'm estimating to be about 1.3 million. But flood, the deductible is actually very low.
Okay.
So for flood in particular, I think we're in pretty good shape. It's the wind.
Any other questions or comments?
I'd also be interested, is there anything, and so another purpose of me presenting this to you is, so this is gonna kind of get your juices flowing and this and that. So you'll probably have some maybe ideas later on. Oh, I would like to know more about this. So please provide that information, but just anything else you guys can think of now that you think that should be looked into, that that you would want more information on?
I think this is a tremendous start. Thank you for bringing this up and getting into this. I think there are a lot of applications to what the right numbers are for us to have in the funds, where we can apply for excess funds, what the downsides and upsides. And we feel ready to look at conclusions and numbers and give our input to you as a committee here. I think it's just terrific. I think it's a great topic to explore, and it may help us as it relates to the whole fire rescue situation. So I think that's terrific. Thank you.
I guess that concludes my presentation. Thank you very much for
Thank
your
you.
attention.
Before we actually go into the board comments, I'd like to defer for a second to what you had brought up recently and just talk about your recommendations on that, just so we can have some cross conversation if necessary, and then we'll go right into the comments.
Yeah, I think that some of what transpired today actually goes along with what I was going to add as an agenda item before I knew we were going to actually have some of these conversations today. And it really has to do with the scheduling of our meetings, the timing of our meetings, and what deliverables I think we should expect of ourselves from our meetings. And I thought that today was a good day to discuss it, just because we have so many new members with us now that haven't been on this, on the board before. I think that all of us who are here, I mean, we're all volunteers and we want our time to be meaningful, which means that we want the board's work to be meaningful. And as I said before, we're not an executive group, we're not a legislative group. So our function is to look at information and then hopefully advise and recommend to the commission. And what I found since I've been a member is that in spite of some of our best efforts, the timing of our meetings doesn't seem to be in sync necessarily with the best timing for us to be able to give meaningful recommendations. So like we had a meeting very early on in the budget process, but then we really, I mean, we got little smatterings, but we really haven't discussed the budget as in where we would say as a group, yes, we really like this year's budget. We recommend that the commission go forward with the budget as presented to us. Or we like the budget, but how about taking an additional look at items X, Y, and Z? And I think those are the kinds of deliverables that would be helpful to the commission if they came out of this advisory board. And as we're entering this year where there's going to be a lot going on in addition to the budget, particularly as it relates to fire rescue, and particularly as it relates to some of the both majority and minority reports from the Charter Review Board in terms of spending limits, various caps, et cetera, that if it's going to work for the maximal benefit of the town, this group needs to be willing to have meetings that aren't just scheduled quarterly, they need to be scheduled timely. And there are going to be periods of time where they need to be more frequent so that discussions can actually end in recommendations if it's felt by the group that that's an appropriate thing to do. And I recognize that that's, you know, can increase additional demands on members of the advisory board. And even worse, it creates additional demands for staff. And, you know, having been on both sides of this, where I've been senior administration, where I was kind of like the advisor to the committee, and also on boards where you're sitting as the committee members, it can really be tough for staff to be given these presentations over and over to different committees. So we have to be conscious of their time. But I don't know, I'd like to see us function, particularly as we get into this really busy time where some important decisions are going to have to be made by the town in terms of finance, that we are able to coordinate our efforts, if you will, in the most effective way. So, you know, I mean, I don't even know how some of this stuff works here, but I assume that for an agenda, for example, and I know everything in sunshine and so on gets a little bit more complicated, but I assume the chairman gets together with staff and you guys plan an agenda and meeting dates and so on and so forth. And we just need to take into consideration what we're doing, because again, today, like the most important stuff on the agenda probably didn't appear on the agenda. I mean, it was an add-on to the agenda, which means that the group doesn't really get to prep for any of that. It's an interesting presentation, but we're not prepared to really discuss exactly what to do with that information at this point. And then if we don't have another meeting for X number of months, it kind of gets lost, I think. Anyway, just some thoughts, not an action item. I don't have any motion to make about it, but just to bring it up.
Are there any other comments on this issue? Anybody on the, okay, I would say in your comments that there is some validity. And I think it's something that, again, has to be discussed with the management and so forth. And again, we actually, with the exception of a few fixed things like reviewing the audits and reviewing different things, we do what the commission assigns us to do. And I think it's appropriate that we do review that and look at what was and what can be, and if it's appropriate to make adjustments, make adjustments. Yeah. Any other comments on that? Okay, thank you. As far as board members' comments or reports, does anybody have anything they want to talk about or anything they want to bring up or any other comments?
Has there been any initiatives to increase the revenue to the town at all?
I'm sorry, who are you going to direct that question to?
To you.
Was that?
Has there been, to you, the chairperson, has there been any attempts to increase the revenue in the town from non-traditional sources?
No, not to my knowledge. I refer that to Matt, from a planning point of view.
Nothing significant, as mentioned by the vice mayor. Property taxes provide the bulk of the revenues within the town. We receive other shared revenues from the state in terms of half-cent sales tax and state revenue sharing and communication service taxes. And also we have local ordinances that provide for franchise fee revenue from Florida Power and Light and from Florida Gas. But we don't really have, the only commercial property in town is Delray Sands. There's not as if we have features analogous to Boca Raton and Delray, where they have commercial districts and things of that nature and commercial property. We just don't have that in the town. So there's really no initiatives that way. So I guess in general, I would say no. And just because of the unique demographics and unique residential nature of the town of Highland Beach is the primary reason.
The only thing I would add to that is the town is extremely active in looking for grants.
Yes.
And extra funds and payments of projects. There's a bunch of them in progress right now. One of the commissioners is really assigned to that legislative communication. So that is something that more than ever is an active thing. So if that helps with the answer, as far as getting additional revenue.
I'd like to ask a question to the gentleman.
Please.
Have you had inquiries from residents about raising funds, or, because I don't hear that. I hear just the opposite.
So I see opportunities for public use of town-owned property that could possibly bring revenue.
Well, could you give me an example?
So, we have this beautiful library over here, right? And it has an intercoastal that it bumps up against, right? I think that, there's possibly some things that you could do on the outside of that library on the intracoastal that could potentially generate some revenue. So that's why I was curious if there were any initiatives. I looked through the income, of the past year and where it's all coming from. But I was just curious if anyone was driving any additional revenue sources.
There's always ongoing discussions. I'd say one discussion that took place a few years ago was producing, if it was possible to produce bottled water from a water plant for sale. I mean, it turned out that that was not a feasible thing, but those discussions are always welcome and ideas are always welcome.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, my idea of a bake sale wasn't hugely well received, as I recall, but I had suggested at one point, and I don't know if this is a viable option, but putting the word out that the town would be willing to accept donations for certain public safety type items. And it was sort of precipitated by, I was in Israel where we managed to run across this brand new fire rescue ambulance. And it had the name of a well-known philanthropist from Boca Raton who I knew from my work at the hospital, plastered on the side of the ambulance. So I raised the possibility, and I don't know how viable this is, but we have some well-to-do, well-meaning folks in town, certainly. And as we approach some of these new projects that require significant capital, I think it's at least worth a little marketing to say whether there might be some people who were interested in donating. It's hard to get people to donate a lift for the sewer plant, but an ambulance or a fire truck or something like that, I think some people might look at differently. So that would be an avenue that I suggested that isn't really a commercial venture, but is conceivable. And there are plenty of examples for it, certainly in other areas. And in the town charter, there is provision for us to be able to accept such charitable, if you will, or public service type donations and utilize them.
I might comment that we in fact do with the Police Foundation. There's some nice sizable donations and extra things that are in fact donated as well as dollars. So that might be a good example of what you're talking about.
Yeah, so we do have two examples that I didn't mention. One is the police, as you just mentioned. The other one is the Friends of the Library. And some of us, many people in town donate something at least to the library every year to help support their efforts. But in this instance, I was talking more about the potential for possibly bigger ticket items.
There are no other comments. I'll move on to announcements. August 24th is a Town Commission special meeting. August 31st, Code Enforcement Board regular meeting. September 6th, Town Hall is closed in observance of Labor Day. September 9th, Planning Board meeting. September 13th, that's at 9:30. September 13th, 1:30, Town Commission meeting. September 13th, 5:01, Town Commission special first public hearing on the budget. September 21st, at 1:30, Town Commission special meeting, second public hearing on the budget. If there's no other business, then I will call this meeting to adjournment at 3:17 p.m. Thank you all for coming.